We asked that you had your practices inventory complete before you came to today's session because we're going to walk you through some good stuff. So I'm going to hand it over to Crystal.
Hello. I'm so excited to see everyone. I'm like, Georgia, it's been a minute. So seeing some of the names and the familiar faces pop up has been nice. I'm really excited to kind of move into this next phase of your work together. We are flying our planes, and I'm hoping you're seeing some success and knowing it's okay to do those landings to take back off if you have to revisit and talk through things. So today we're going to be really talking about that practices inventory and moving into, you've got this data at your hands and really having a plan for using it. All right, you can go to the next one. So our core goals of today are going to be for you to feel confident leaving this meeting, being able to analyze the data to determine your school's professional learning and coaching needs, and then really reflect on that data to prioritize what's first. Where do we want to start with this? Because this work can be overwhelming. There's a lot of moving pieces to it. And so really having time to talk as a team about where you are and what we want to do next and what we want to focus on. All right. So really thinking about our focus between last year and this year when it comes to data. We know that there's been a lot of different data pieces and components to this work. And we want you to have a good visual of really looking at how all of those data components work together. So our goal is really bringing in that fidelity, perception, and the practice together. So looking at this is where you've got that TFI that we did last year that you did as a team. That was you really thinking about and reflecting, where are you in fidelity? Then you've got that SAS data where it's kind of overarching data of where they see they are in implementation and priorities. Really, what do the staff see as the priorities? Then you add in this practices inventory component, which is them not just thinking big picture implementation, but specific tier one practices that help this work together and looking at where they are with those practices to give you actionable data to know what professional learning needs you have. So between looking at your fidelity, that perception priorities, and then really where they are in these practices, it's going to help you as a team come together to form a coaching and action plan. And we're hoping that through those data points that we've worked with before and then through today, you're really going to see how this can all be actionable and that you feel very well prepared as a team to sit at the table and look at this data and say, here's the action we're going to take with this specific data. All right. So just kind of a reminder of that practices inventory data use. This is a self-assessment tool for them that when they take it, we want them to be reflective of their own implementation of each of the practice covered. This first time, it was a great tool to collect that baseline data. So today, what you're going to be looking at is that baseline data to determine the current status of the implementation and to set goals around it. It can guide the school team in using this to select, hey, of all the practices, this one we see we need the most work with. And then also it can be a progress monitoring tool as you move forward in this work. Another great thing is we do have PDF versions of this that could work as a checklist for staff when they're working on certain practices or even a walkthrough tool. So just kind of a reminder of that. So beautiful thing about Google Forms, this is a new update that I'm very excited about that I didn't know they had. Whenever you go to access your data, when you open your form and you click on responses, if you do the summary for each question, this is a new feature, it gives you a percentage. That was not a thing of the past. So yay on that one. That'll make this much easier. But in order to access your data, you will go to that form. You'll look at the responses tab, click summary. You can go question by question or you can go individual. But for the purposes of today's analysis tool that we'll give you, summary is going to be the one you want to look at. And then you'll review the scores for each item. You're good. You can go ahead. Yep. So this tool looks very overwhelming. We're going to go piece by piece. So don't look at this and freak out. So we're really excited about this tool we have for you today. It serves two main purposes. And today we're going to focus really on the first purpose, which is the data analysis and prioritizing. Next week, and as we get into the coaching cycles, we'll look more at the planning for the coaching and that collaboration component to it. But what this tool does is it's going to help you break down the items from your practices inventory and be very intentional about looking at each item and looking at each section of it with relationships, physical arrangement, those different sections. Looking at each one, kind of looking at where your baseline data is, where are they in terms of their data and their implementation, and you'll get a big picture overall of all the practices. And then from there on that first page that you see here, that's going to be where you do some reflecting on what does the data show, what are our strengths, what are areas we want to work on, and that will help you when it comes to prioritizing what you're going to do. All right. So when accessing the tool reminder, but I wanted to kind of do a reminder if you're like me, having that follow-up reminder. To access the tool, what you will do is you will go to that behavioralliance.org, click on the MTSS-B Tier 1 for Echo, and then it's going to open up the document, which you see to the right on the top, which should be familiar to you. But in here, you have a link that gives you access to the slide deck for today that has all the directions. So if you need to circle back and come back to it, it's there. But it also has a forced copy link of the data analysis tool that we will be using today. So very excited to be able to get into that tool, and this is the directions for that. You will, where it says make a copy, and it will be your own copy. I would go ahead and retitle it with your school name, add it to your folder. This will be the tool that you use as you prioritize your PL throughout the year. All right. Perfect. So now we start getting into the way this document breaks down. So what you will do for each section of your practices inventory of this document. Each one is going to break down the 3 phases. This follows the different phases of practices we've talked about, where you have the foundational ones, which are really breaking down the relationships, the things at the beginning of the year you want to have in place to be preventative. Then it's going to break down phase 2, which are those proactive and positive practices that really talk about middle of the year, that active engagement, that's monitoring and supervising, and those. And then you're going to have the behavior shaping responses one, which is responding to that behavior. It follows the same flow of the phases we've talked about. Thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing the file if you want to see what it follows in the chat. But just so you can kind of see how it breaks down, what you will do is for phase 1, you will pull up your Google form and you will look at each area. So for relationships, there are 5 total questions or items that go with relationships that the staff reflected on. What you will look at is the percentage for each of those 5 items. And what you're going to come up with is how many of those items scored less than 80% at a level 4. So at that highest level of implementation. So the out of 5 would be, so let's say we did this, how many out of 5 of those were at less than 80%? And you will put that number here. So this is that baseline data, kind of getting your start in place for how many of them were less than 80% at level 4. Then you're going to, from there, you'll talk about, is PL needed? If there are any items that fall below that 80%, then professional learning and coaching will be needed in that section. And this will be where you really go into differentiating the supports you need, and you'll look at how many, kind of where you are in that, but that'll be a conversation that comes later. For now, it's just getting down how many of them are there at less than 80%, and then is that going to be an area we need to focus on? Because if you don't have any that fall there, it might be something that you don't need to spend time on. This is where it's a beautiful tool to know and differentiating to your school's specific needs, because what your school needs is going to be very different than any other school. So this helps you tailor it down to your specific needs based on that data. And then over here, you'll see the grade out one. This column is for later if you decide to use this tool again for progress monitoring or letting them do a follow-up. You have a place that you can compare on the same document that you can come back to. Okay. So once you have done the breakdown of the 3 different phases of the practices, you will then reflect and prioritize. This is where you together as a team will sit down and really talk about those about the data. You're going to look at how many items you have, reflect on if it's an accurate reflection, and if not, have some conversations about that. And then really digging into what are your areas of strength, what's contributed to those. Because if it is something that everyone showed that they're doing well, you want to also have conversations about sustaining that, right? It doesn't mean that practice gets ignored. You want to also have a conversation about, hey guys, this is working really well right now based on this feedback. What's going well to make it sustainable over time, right? So really celebrating those strengths and talking about how you can ensure they stay as a strength. What are we doing well that's going to continue that? Then from there, you'll move into looking at the areas that do need some professional learning and coaching support. And from there, you will want to prioritize based on which one maybe needs the most. Or maybe as a school, you sit down and talk about, relationships is lower and we know that's the core of everything. We want to start there, period. So, really having conversations about prioritizing. When selecting a practice to prioritize, we normally would say start with phase one at the beginning of the year, but we know we're kind of in the year. So it might be where you start with phase two based on where you are right now, but you're going to want to make sure you fully cover and work through phase one and phase two because it's so easy to start with phase three in responding. But response strategies are great, but they're not going to do much in terms of preventing and being proactive. So you really want to, dig deep into those first two phases to set up systems in place to help minimize the need for phase three. All right. And then we want to remind you of the PL and coaching model we use. And this is going to be, I'm really excited. So, right now, today's core focus is getting you familiar with the tool, really looking at that data, and having some good, strong conversations as a team. As we move forward, we're going to dig a lot deeper into this coaching, the coaching cycles, and what it looks like to really support this work and these practices through our functions, our 5 functions, coaching functions. And we have a tool in the document that has an overarching breakdown, but Georgia, you go to the next slide. I do want to remind you that each practice has its own specific coaching guide that will really be an invaluable tool during this process. It breaks down, each of them is broken down into these 4 sections. So you have a practice overview that really goes into, it's like a 1-pager for each of the practices. You've got professional learning planning guides that you'll use. And then you have goal setting implementation resources, and then progress monitoring and reflection. So as you get into the coaching cycles, and we'll go more into that next week, but as you do, we do want to remind you of this resource that you'll have as you start having these conversations. All right. So today we know that we have 1 or 2 representatives from school or districts here. So we want to make sure that it stays in the forefront for you to engage your team and staff in this work with you. So after today's meeting, it's going to be really important that you come together as a school team and you share the information from this. Sit down and do a good data dig, looking at that practices inventory and that document and going deep into what ones need that extra support. Where are you? It just gives you a great big picture. Work through that practices inventory data tool. Discuss action steps from this echo session. Okay, so here we are. This is what we're looking at the data now. Let's go ahead and set a time to prioritize what that can look like. It might be where before your next meeting, you set the priority. Everyone has homework to go and look at the coaching resources that are available to go with the one you prioritize so that at your next meeting you come prepared. So really just thinking through what action steps can you do as a team to support this work moving forward. Then as a team, you want to decide how and what data are you going to share or engage the staff in from this. We're big believers that if you collect the data and you're using it, it's very important to share it. So let them know, let your staff know, hey, we are going to be focusing on this professional learning, and here's why. We heard you, we're using your data actively for this. And there's power in that. And there's power in them knowing that you're differentiating to the needs of the school based on that. If they're, hey, guys, we did so good in this one practice that we're able to skip it. Kudos to you. Let's keep doing this work and maybe share with them which practice it is. And, and that could be a tool to use that sustainability of that practice, like celebrating their success with it. So just being mindful together as a team, what are we sharing and how are we going to engage the staff in it? And then as you start coming up with your prioritizing, the practices and the PL and coaching, just make sure you have an ongoing conversation about what it's going to look like to communicate that. And then with your school staff, share and engage them in some of this practices inventory data. Let them see some of that and have conversations around it with you. And then make sure you have a plan for communicating that professional learning. All right. At this point, I think if anyone has any questions for me, I know I feel like I just